Hey guys, welcome to the Home Recorded Music Podcast. I am here today with my guest, Martin Pullan. Hello, Martin. How did you first get into music?
I started playing violin when I was 7. Then my parents forced me into it with a shotgun, and I continued doing that till I was 18. But about 10, I picked up the guitar. And then, of course, as we all did, had dreams of becoming a pop star. My parents thought it would be a good idea when I left school if I got some sort of backup plan. So they thought, oh, what can we get him into? So I did a apprenticeship, kind of like a TAFE course, I guess, but with working as well in telecoms with the post office, which is now called British Telecom. And then, so that went for 3 years. And of course, as soon as that finished, I was like, right, I'm going to be a pop star now. I met a girl and it was decided that we should get married. And then after, I think I was on the dole for like 6 months and I was playing in a band and we were playing in the London pubs. But we did some recording in the studio, but we weren't really sort of getting anywhere. I was getting married. I thought, geez, I better get a job, a proper job. And because we'd done some demos in a couple of studios, one of which was the studio where the Police were at the time doing their very first album. And we were lucky enough to have a little preview of that before it was released. And I sort of got interested in the whole recording thing from that because I was fascinated by the process. And so I thought, well, maybe if I have to get a job, I should get a job in a studio, thinking that can't be that hard, surely. And so at the time, I think there were 120 24-track studios in London. And I wrote to pretty much all the studios asking for a job. And I was lucky enough to score a job at the studio in Wimbledon called R.G. Jones, which at the time was doing pretty good work. I mean, they'd done some tracks with the Stones, and they were working with people like Cleo Lane and Leo Sayer, people like that. So, I was very lucky that I got a job there, and I worked there for 2 years as a tape operator, which is basically a slave. So, you sort of you made the tea for the orchestral sessions, and you went to pick up people's lunches and all of that sort of stuff. And I did that for 2 years. And then after 2 years, I managed to get into doing some recording. So I was there for another 2 years as a second engineer before I moved to Australia.
What year would have that been? Around about?
So I started at R.G. Jones in 1978 and I left 78. The UK in 1982.
So you were saying you were a tape, what was it? A tape
operator.
Tape operator.
But if once you got to the stage of, them trusting you with these very important jobs, you were able to be a tape operator. So you sat by the 24-track tape machine or with a remote for the 24-track tape machine, and you dropped in to record. So someone's doing a take on guitar, they need to drop in a couple of bars in the middle of their solo. And so they say, okay, we're dropping in after 4 bars of the solo. So you go, okay, nervous with your finger on the button. And so you drop in and then you drop out again. There was none of this cutting and pasting like we do now in Pro Tools. It was like, I had to get it sort of pretty much right. So as the young whippersnapper tape operator, if you stuffed up the very important take, it was like a major thing. And not only that, but we were mixing without a computer. So when it was time to mix the 24 tracks, there would probably be 2 or 3 people on the board, and they all had their little jobs of faders. You push up the vocal in the chorus and pull it down again. And so you had this. It was like a teamwork to do the mixing. So you gradually become part of that team, and you learn about recording and mic placement and making tea and all of that sort of stuff. And eventually, you get to do the recording yourself. My first recording, apart from just a couple where I was just recording piano and vocals, was an album which was done in a weekend for an English artist called Selena Jones. And it was all in. So at the same time, I had rhythm section, brass section, string section, the vocals were overdubbed afterwards, but it was everyone at the same time. We had a whole weekend only to record an album, and that was my first job, my first proper job. I still got a vinyl copy of that album to this day. It was mixed in Japan. I didn't mix it, but I recorded it, and that was super stressful, I can tell you.
Unreal.
I mean, it was all written down, so it was charted. So there was no kind of like, the musicians had their parts to play. So that, and they were all pro studio musicians. So as far as the recording of the tracks went, it was, once you got everything set up, it was an easy process because they're all reading from charts. They're all professionals.
Like you said, that's the difference between this day and age when you can use Pro Tools and back then. I mean, the preparation for something like that is so much more than.
And you were paying a lot of money. I mean, studio time. I remember back then in the studio was £50 an hour, so it's $100 an hour or more, 120, something like that. This was back in the late 70s. I mean, because to equip a studio, to buy one of those consoles would be £1 million, and the tape machines were, like £30,000-40,000. So it was an expensive process. So by the time you got to the studio, you had to be prepared because you weren't going to be mucking around. You can't sit around the studio wasting time writing songs. Mm-hmm. You've just got to be prepared, like you say, when you go in, no time wasting. And that, in a way, kind of created a certain pressure on people to perform. So someone had to do a solo. And they knew they had to get it right.
So that was in, you said 78, was it? Is that right?
Yeah, 78. I started and I left there in 82.
Where did you go from there musically? Did you go, you were already a music engineer by that time, or?
Yeah, so I was very lucky that I walked into a job at a studio called Flagstaff Studios, which now Flagstaff is a voiceover studio. Then it was a music studio, and it was in West Melbourne, and it was owned by Mike Brady, who you know from Up There Kazali fame, Bruce Rollin, who wrote the theme, the film scores for Man from Snowy River and Far Lap, and another guy called Andrew Wiltshire, who did a lot of commercials. In fact, all three of them did a lot of commercials very successfully. So I was thrown into this sort of world of recording commercials, which again was something you had to do quickly and efficiently, and under direction from people from advertising agencies who offered me sitting there saying, I don't like this, I don't like that. So, every day you'd have musicians coming in. So it wasn't done on computer. It was all, at that stage, it was still musicians. So they'd come in, we'd start recording at like 8:30 in the morning, and we'd do 2 or 3 commercials and then have lunch and then come back and do some more. It was full on.
What would you say the difference is between doing a commercial and like doing an album or just doing a song? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think there's more, like with a commercial, there's a brief. If somebody's paying the composer, the music writer, to come up with something, it's not like the musician's gone into the studio and he's written the song and he's going to record it, and then he's going to put it out into the world via a record company or on his own and hope that somebody likes it. With a commercial, somebody's engaged the composer to come up with a piece of music for a Ford ad or a Holden ad or a toothpaste ad or whatever it is. And so it's a whole different sort of mindset. There's a lot of freedom to the composer as well, but then there's also the advertising agency involved. And sometimes they'll send a team of people, it'd be like 3 or 4 or 5 creative people from the agency, and they've all got different ideas. So they're giving those ideas to the composer as he's recording, and that's sort of changing things. And and it's all got to be done, again, quickly and efficiently. Okay. So I was there at Flagstaff for a year, and then I got the sack.
Okay.
And that was I think it was because Ernie Rose, who originally when I went there, the studio was being run by a guy called Ian McKenzie, and he was very helpful in getting me to Australia in terms of, getting me a job and all that sort of stuff. And then the studio was sold and Ernie Rose took over, and Ernie's a good mate. We're really good mates, and I was a tenant of his for years at Metropolis Studios with my mastering suite. But at the time, he thought that I was perhaps being a little bit of a smart ass And so he thought it would be probably better for my career and the studio's career if I didn't work there anymore. And as it turns out, it was, because I worked at that studio as a freelance engineer, and I worked at all the other studios in Melbourne as a freelance engineer for many, many years.
That's when you started EdenSound mastering, or is there something before that?
That's not when I started EdenSound mastering. It's when I started EdenSound Productions, because I needed a business name, because I was basically then a sole trader, I suppose, with different studios, and I started working more on records. So, I did things like the Black Sorrows albums, Hold On To Me and Harley and Rose, recording, not mixing. And I mixed, I think, 5 songs on Harley and Rose. On Hold On To Me. But, I was doing mixing, I was doing recording, but no mastering at this stage. Somebody like Joe Camilleri would call me up and say, I'm doing an album, I need you to record it. And this might be a 3-month process. So it will be 3 months of work. It's late 80s. I started thinking I'm spending too many hours in the studio. I've got a child now. I need to sort of like back off a little bit, I suppose. And that kind of started me thinking, how can that still involves me in the music industry, but that doesn't tie me up for 12, 14 hours a day for 3 months. And also that kind of coincided with the first digital recording, on computers. So I thought, I've got to learn how to do this stuff, because this is like the future as well. So I got I think it was a 386 PC, and it was still on DOS. There was no Windows.
Wow. And
I started doing editing on a program called Editor Plus, which was a very simple 2-track editor. So that kind of led into some kind of fundamental mastering. And then I thought, I need somewhere to do this. So I'd helped my friend Ross Burton, who was a producer and arranger who did all the arranging on Young Talent Time and the Bert Newton Show at that stage. I helped him to build a studio in Richmond, which was opposite the Central Club Hotel, and it's called Studio RBX, Ross Burton being the RB. And I helped him to build a studio, put it together, and then I did a lot of work in there recording with him. And I thought, I need somewhere to do this kind of digital editing, mastering thing. So I took a couple of offices there and set up 2 little setups there. And I wasn't really doing proper mastering because it wasn't really a proper room. It was more of an office. But I worked in there sort of pretty much full time for a few years until after Ross passed away. And then I needed somewhere to relocate because the studio was the management was changing and things were a bit uncertain. So I called up Ernie Rose, who we mentioned before, and said, I need somewhere to operate from my mastering. And he said, you can come and use Studio One here at Metropolis, because Studio One had closed down a few years before. It's just sitting empty. He said, you can use the room. And this was like a Westlake control room, which is a very, very good control room that was built to these American specifications. I mean, when they built this room back in, I think it was 79, it was some ridiculous amount of money to build. It was something like $300,000 to build. And it was a seriously good room. And I was going, wow, I can use this room. So I kind of left Richmond and I moved everything to South Melbourne, to Metropolis. And I was a tenant there of Ernie's for 16 years until Metropolis kind of fizzled out. So I was in that great room, which has recorded so many hit records for, like John Farnham and Australian Cruel and all these amazing bands. Very delightful to be in that space for so long. I really enjoyed it.
That's amazing.
So that was my kind of got serious about mastering. Yeah, that was 95.
From 95, 16 years.
2011.
2011. Wow. Okay. Right. So I must have, because I met you around that time. Actually, it would have been 2012 that I met you. So it wouldn't have been much longer that you would have been relocated.
Yeah. So after that, I worked from the home theatre, which I built like a studio at my house. So
I remember that. Yeah.
In Baldwin. Yeah. So that's where you would have worked with me.
So within that 16 years, so you mentioned a few names there, but are there any other name drops? So you said John Farnham.
I did a few albums for John Farnham, not any of the really big ones, but later albums for John. I remastered all of the albums for Hunters and Collectors, all of Jimmy Barnes's albums after he went solo, basically. Boom Crash Opera's albums, the Angels albums. I remastered a lot of older albums for those kind of acts, and I did a lot of obviously new albums for bands. A lot of stuff with Mondo Rock.
Definitely a lot. I've seen your walls and your plaques of different amazing artists that you've mastered over the years. Now, I just want to just preface for anyone that doesn't understand mastering in general. And you just mentioned something, you did remasters. The process of doing a remaster for a band, how does that work? Do you get the original mixtapes and then master them, or do you actually get the master and then remaster?
Sometimes you get the original mixtapes. Other times they can't find them, so you can master from another digital version of that. But the point of it is, and there's a lot of controversy about this, I guess, but around 96, I think it was, the technology came in that we could start to sort of make things louder, this digital compression and limiting that came in. So a lot of CDs pre-96, a lot of audio that's pre-96 is quite low and level and dynamic compared to what comes after that, which tends to be higher in level and less dynamic. So with a mix, you've got peaks and you've got loud peaks and you've got soft bits. I mean, classical music is much more exaggerated. So you've got very, very quiet bits and very, very loud bits, and movie music and stuff. But with pop music, it tends to be a lot less, but still you have kind of loud peaks and softer peaks. And when you're working with digital, there's a limit, which is the ceiling, digital zero. You can't go any higher than that. If you go higher than digital zero, you get nasty, horrible distortion, digital distortion. It's not pleasant. So what people try and do is they try and compress the audio. Here's the ceiling. They push the audio up into the ceiling, making things sound a little bit more punchy and a little bit more kind of in your face and louder compared to the track or before or after yours. And that the problem with that is that became a bit of what we call the loudness wars. So every album was kind of like trying to be louder than every other album before it, until there was this album from Metallica, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it was like the loudest album ever. And it sounds not great because it's just really, when you squash things too much, it just starts to sound lifeless and, horrible, basically, and hard to listen to. So now, hopefully, now we've got back to this stage where kind of like there's a happy medium. Yeah. But the point was that remastering a lot of albums, and it's a lot to do with marketing as well. So a record company would go, okay, we need to repackage, this album and put it out there again and say digitally remastered, and then we'll sell some more. Definitely not bullshit, because we do remaster them and it definitely sounds different. Like if you listen to an album from before 96 that hasn't been remastered and one after that has, you'll notice a difference, and hopefully it sounds better.
A good point. I've heard about the loudness wars and all that kind of stuff, but I never sort of put it into the visualization that it was to be louder than the next person. And I think that's an interesting kind of thought, because it's like, okay, yeah, like they're really competing for that space on the radio, and if you can make your song louder on the radio, then after the next song, it's going to show up
now on streaming services as well. But the thing is, now they've kind of cottoned onto this. So you have these algorithms that they regulate the gain, so that if you're listening to a playlist and you've got a song from the 60s that hasn't been remastered, it doesn't sound really quiet compared to that album from Metallica that sounds super loud. So these algorithms sort of are supposed to go through and make everything sound the same level. I kind of hate that, because it's sort of telling people like me who work professionally that, we've no right to be doing what we do. It's like sort of getting a magazine that's got lots of lovely pictures and making all the pictures have the same brightness and contrast as each other, so they look the same to me. I mean, and also, if you take a whole album and you've mastered an album so that some songs are really kind of quiet, the acoustic songs, and then the Rockin songs are loud, I think, there's a danger of these algorithms sort of changing that relationship that you've worked hard to sort of make happen.
Then you got your own little suite in the cinema studio, as you called it, which I've had the pleasure of being to many years ago, back in 2012, when I was just completed an album called Sonorous Existence, which has just been reissued back onto streaming services for anybody that wants to go and check it out. That was mastered by yourself. And then it was 2 years later that I came back to you and did another album with you called Lost in Limbo, which I actually just also re-released back on the streaming services when I was at the studio there. So when I first started making an album, I went and, did all the guitars and stuff in a cupboard and, onto Adobe Audition or something. I had a friend, Adrian Pauper, he mixed it in Pro Tools. We got that mixed. And so each time I was sort of doing these processes, I was learning as I went. I was learning, okay, I can record it myself, and then I can get it mixed in this certain way. And then it was like the mastering process was new to me, and learning about, what the difference is between, recording, mixing, and mastering. My experience of being able to sit down for hours and hear my songs go from being mixed but without life or without a zing, and then mastering gives it that zing. If that's a kind of, for anyone that's never dealt with mastering, or if anyone's watching this that hasn't, isn't into the music side of recording or whatever, what would you class mastering as? What does mastering do?
Well, it's the final opportunity to improve the sound in some way. It's the final polish. It's an opportunity to remove some frequencies that might be bothersome. And I tend to do a lot of fairly sort of drastic EQing in mastering, which somebody jumped on me and said, that's not what mastering is. It's all about just subtle smoothing out. But I don't believe in that. I mean, okay, if a mix is perfect, yes, you don't need to do a lot to it. But, very often these days people are mixing in their home studios, they're recorded in their cupboards. There's lots of frequencies flying around that might not be ideal. So I kind of tend to get in there and tweak those. So it's an opportunity to get those things right. It's the last opportunity. This opportunity to make all the various songs on the album sit at the same level and with the same sort of overall tone. So it's like color grading for a movie. So you're trying to make all these songs sit together, and then you're dealing with the relationship between one song and another. So the transition, the gap, or the crossfade, or whatever that is, and then you make a master, which is called a production master, which can be something that's just sent off to a bunch of digital files for iTunes or Spotify, or some people still make CDs, and so you send some files off to a CD factory and they make them into CDs. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what it is.
So I remember us having a talk one time about CDs and whether, there's a difference between 96 and 48 and CDs and records, and what your preferred type was. So I'm going to put you on the spot there and so
how long have we got?
What is your preferred medium?
Here's a shocking statement. Mm-hmm. CD quality is as good as we need. Even though they think they can perceive a difference above CD quality, which is 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit. It's been proven time and again that they really can't. Maybe there's a few freaks out there, but generally people can't. So CD quality is great. Like if you put on a recording that was done on, 96K 24-bit or analog tape, and then you make a CD of it and you sit someone in the studio and you switch between one and the other, they don't know, it's a blindfold test, they're not going to pick it. Mm-hmm. They'll think they can pick it, and sometimes they'll pick it, but it won't be consistent. They'll never get it consistently right. I've done it many times. If you get a vinyl copy of something that's been recorded beautifully and play it, they'll pick it every time because vinyl is a very imperfect format. It's like a mechanical thing. You've got distortion, you've got phase incoherency, particularly in the bottom end. You've got distortion in the top end. As the needle stylus goes from the outside to the inside, the radius of the curve is getting tighter. So it's like the needle's going around a corner. As it goes around a tighter corner, the quality gets worse. So the quality at the outside of the record is better than the quality in the middle. Personally, I couldn't wait. It was great when they came up with CD. It was like, finally, we got something in the studio that sounded like the mix we did, rather than you get the vinyl pressing back and you go, it's not right, so we need to do another pressing and try and get it as good as we can.
Do you see a resurgence of CDs maybe one day?
I reckon there might be, but the quality of the files now, when MP3s came out, they were pretty bad.
For ages. I always get a bit nostalgic when the CD revolution has ended. I really enjoyed that. And I feel like, when I came and did the mastering with you for those two, well, especially for the 2012 one, it's like I stepped into the last day of CDs ever being anything, It was kind of like I dreamt about it for 10, 15 years, and people would buy a CD. Yeah. There's no way, even in 2012, I could actually go around and I could still hand out CDs and people would buy them for $20. There's no chance I could go and sell CDs this day and age.
Really?
I don't think so. Like I am constantly seeing CD players on the side of the road for the last 10 years, and now I don't see any of them. So I think they're all gone. I don't know anyone that owns a CD player except for me.
Right. But what about record player though? Vinyl record player?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that made a resurgence. That's come back. It's cool. It's hip now to own records. Whilst working in do we call it the cinema studio or the EdenSound mastering studio? Well,
it was the home theater before it became the studio, and it was actually, I don't know if you remember, but I had a desk that converted into an ottoman.
Yep.
So on the weekend it would become the home theater, and then during the week it was the studio. It's like a dual purpose room.
Yeah. Right. That's pretty cool. And just to name drop there again, I remember you'd worked over that time. So that was, where are we up to now? So 2011 through till...
I left the house at the end of, it was really mid-2020. Yeah.
Okay, so you were there 9 years. And in that 9 years, I'd seen on your walls there you'd worked with a lot of the Australian Idol crew, like... was it
most of them would have been at Metropolis, the Australian Idol ones, like Sebastian and Shannon Noll and all those. They were when I was at the studio in Metropolis in Bank Street.
Right.
So after 2011, I did a lot of other stuff. But I guess the biggest thing I did at the home theatre setup would have been mixing and mastering stuff for Deep Purple. So I remixed the Made in Japan album of the original 8 tracks, which was sent to me from Abbey Road, which was pretty exciting. And I mixed in 5.1 and mastered the John Lord Concerto for group and orchestra.
And I have one more question, Martin. What is the legacy of Martin Pullan at the end of the days?
Gee, I wish you hadn't asked that, because it's something I think about quite a lot, being 64 years old. I mean, I guess it's just those projects that I've worked on over the years, and particularly that one that was just the most exciting thing was the Deep Purple Made in Japan. To be able to remix that piece of history was just incredible for me.
It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today. And
with you.
Is there any projects that you've got going that you want to promote, or is there anything that people can...
Well, I just recently mastered the new Ash Grimold album. I don't think the album's going to be released until later in the year, maybe November or something like that. I'm not sure. But that was pretty exciting one to work on.
That's
I'll just play you out on a bit of this so you know.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. That is Martin Pullan. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and keep rocking, keep rolling. Rock.